He's not teaching hate, he's teaching history. And since the American white man has used his control over the press and over the textbooks and over all forms of media to make it appear that he has done us a favor by bringing us here and enslaving us, then the Honorable Elijah Muhammad has to rewrite history or retell history. And since the white man can't dispute this truth, he tries to defend himself by saying that Mr. Muhammad is teaching hate. It's not hate to say that we were kidnapped and brought here, it's truth. It's not hate to say that we were Jim Crow, discriminated and segregated, it's truth. It's not hate to say that the Supreme Court, which is the highest court in this country, came up with a hypocritical desegregation decision 9 years ago, which they haven't enforced yet. That's not hate, that's truth.
Without a doubt, one of the most influential and powerful figures in modern day history is that of El-Hajj El-Shabazz, aka Malcolm X. Being one of the leading advocates for human and civil rights, Malcolm's radical vision, passion, and genuine dedication to seek liberation for black people all over the world trails a legacy which can never be dismantled or dismissed. From foster child to high school dropout to serving 6.5 years in prison to transform his life and becoming one of the world's most prominent leaders, Malcolm definitely continues to inspire and impact hearts, minds, and souls throughout the globe, even to this day. This is a look inside the life of the man we know as Malcolm X. Malcolm Little was born on May 19, 1925 at Omaha, Nebraska, and was the fourth of 7 children. Earl Little, Malcolm's father, served as a Baptist minister and a follower of Marcus Messiah Garvey as the Omaha chapter president of the Universal Negro Improvement Association. Malcolm's mother, Louise Little, served as division secretary. In 1928, the Little family moved to Lansing, Michigan, where on November the 7th, the family's home was burnt to the ground by a local white supremacist group. Help was called, but no fire wagon was dispatched or rushed to the scene. This forces the family to settle in East Lansing, Michigan to rebuild. September 28, 1931, Earl Little was killed in what police officials deemed a streetcar accident, but Malcolm later explains that the Ku Klux Klan was behind the murder of his father. The passing of Earl Little resulted in a struggle for young Malcolm and his family to make ends meet and resorted to applying for public assistance. On December 23, 1938, Malcolm's mother is diagnosed as mentally ill and placed at the Kalamazoo State Mental Hospital, where she would stay for the next 26 years. In 1939, the Little children are sent to live with various foster families, while Malcolm, who had been kicked out of school in the 7th grade, is sent to a juvenile home in a nearly all-white community of Mason, Michigan. Improving tremendously in his studies and earning straight A's, young Malcolm was elected president of his 8th grade class, but his teacher discourages him about his dreams of becoming a lawyer by telling him that the legal profession isn't realistic for a black person. This led to Malcolm giving up and dropping out of school. In February of 1941, Ella Collins, Malcolm's half-sister, gains custody of the 15-year-old as he moves to Boston, Massachusetts. Over the next few years, Malcolm will work various jobs, which led him to begin hustling and adopting the nickname Detroit Red. In 1944, Malcolm has his first encounter with law enforcement and sentenced to 4 months in jail and 1 year of probation for larceny. In 1946, Malcolm and a close friend is arrested and charged with grand larceny, breaking and entering, and firearms possession, and sentenced to 10 years in prison. He is only 20 years old. While incarcerated, Malcolm is introduced to the teachings of the Nation of Islam leader, Elijah Muhammad. As the two men correspond, Malcolm continues his course of study, eventually writing to the governor and demanding the right to practice Islam in prison. On August 7, 1952, Malcolm is released on parole and begins to attend meetings as a new Nation of Islam member at Detroit's Temple No. 1 Mosque. Malcolm then rejects the surname Little as a slave name given to his family by white slave owners, as he becomes known as Malcolm X. By August of 1953, the Nation of Islam triples its membership of the Detroit Temple in under a year, appointing Malcolm as assistant minister. Later that year, Elijah Muhammad sends Malcolm back to Boston to serve as head minister of his Temple No. 11 Mosque. He goes on to gain more traction by organizing temples along the East Coast, attracting new members wherever he speaks. In June of 1954, Elijah Muhammad presents Malcolm as chief minister of Harlem's Temple No. 7 Mosque, With the impact of Malcolm's charisma and leadership, within the next 5 years, the Nation of Islam grew well over 40,000 members that supported 49 temples. In 1956, Malcolm's future wife, Betty Sanders, becomes a member of the Harlem Temple and adopts the name Betty X. Malcolm will propose 2 years later as they united as one on January the 14th, 1958. In the same year, their first child, Atala, is born. On August the 28th, 1963, Malcolm observes and criticizes the March on Washington, which was organized by the Big Six leaders of the Civil Rights Movement, one who was that of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Malcolm would go on to describe the march as the farce on Washington. Malcolm claims the demonstrations were, quote, run by whites in front of a statue of a president who had been dead for 100 years and who didn't like us when he was alive. Malcolm was highly critical of King's nonviolent approach, believing King's actions to be too slow-moving and too accommodating to white Americans, and going so far as referring to him as a 20th century Uncle Tom. Malcolm called for a more militant approach, achieving equality and black liberation by any means necessary. King would in return attack what he considered Malcolm's dangerous radicalism, writing fury, demagogic oratory in the black ghettos, urging Negroes to arm themselves and prepare to engage in violence, as he has done, can reap nothing but grief. The two would later meet for the first and only time on Capitol Hill while attending the Senate debate on the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Some say this was a moment where the two leaders reconciled. One thing that is definitely factual is that they both had the same goal: equal rights and justice for black people in America. Just a few days after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, Malcolm goes on to state at a Nation of Islam rally in New York that Kennedy's slaying is, quote, a case of chickens coming home to roost. Soon later, Elijah Muhammad, who had ordered Malcolm not to comment on the assassination, responds by silencing him for 90 days, during which time Malcolm is forbidden to teach or talk to the press. In 1964, boxer Cassius Clay, and dear friend of Malcolm X, was recruited into the Nation of Islam as he would change his name to Muhammad Ali. Tensions began to increase with Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm, as he claimed that Muhammad was a hypocritical womanizer who had fathered children through affairs with his secretaries. This would lead to Malcolm to be suspended indefinitely by the Nation of Islam. Malcolm announced his plans to form his own organization called Muslim Mosque Incorporated. He wanted Ali to come with him, but the young champion was to disappoint him. It would be a decision Ali would live to regret. In April of 1964, Malcolm leaves for a 5-week tour of Egypt, Liberia, Senegal, Nigeria, Ghana, and Saudi Arabia, where he makes a pilgrimage to Mecca and receives a new Islamic name, El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, as well as expresses a somewhat different attitude about race. In Mecca, Malcolm writes he witnessed pilgrims of all colors from all parts of this earth displaying a spirit of unity and brotherhood like I've never seen before. While still determined to bring charges for mistreatment of blacks against the United States and the United Nations, Malcolm suggests that studying Islam might cause white Americans to turn away from their racism. Malcolm will find himself under increased attack at home as the Nation of Islam began eviction proceedings against him and constant threats against his life. Malcolm retaliates by making repeated public reference to Elijah Muhammad's adultery. Malcolm also forms the organization of Afro-American Unity in the fall of 1964, reflecting a growing political agenda, and spends nearly 5 months in Africa, visiting heads of state and lobbying for his UN plan. February the 14th, 1965, Malcolm's home in East Elmhurst is firebombed. Malcolm X says that the attempt were upon the strict orders of Elijah Muhammad. His family is evicted 4 days later. On February the 21st, 1965, Malcolm X is assassinated by rival black Muslims while addressing his organization of Afro-American Unity at the Audubon Ballroom in Washington Heights. In the front row, a pregnant Betty Shabazz shielded her 4 children as men charged the stage after Malcolm was shot with a sawed-off shotgun in the chest. Rapidly faded from the dozen-plus bullets to his body, supporters got him onto a stretcher and into the Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center across the street, but attempts to revive his heart failed. He was declared dead at 3:30 p.m. three men, Thomas Hayer, Norman 3X Butler, and Thomas 15X Johnson, were all convicted of the murder of Malcolm X in March of 1966. The legacy of Malcolm X and his work have inspired and informed many others in their fight for social justice and equality. Most of his words of wisdom still rings true today. He has been immortalized not only in his work, the autobiography of Malcolm X, but in other books, documentaries, and movies, and remains a historical figure admired by all generations. This is Big Mark Entertainment and the life of El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, aka Malcolm X, for eternity.
I pray that God will bless you in everything that you do. I pray that you will grow intellectually so that you can understand the problems of the world and where you fit into in that world picture. And I pray that all the fear that has ever been in your heart will be taken out. And when you look at that man, if you know he's nothing but a coward, you won't fear him. If he wasn't a coward, he wouldn't gang up on you. He wouldn't need to stick it out. This is how they function. They function in mouths. That's a coward. They put on a sheet so you won't know who they are. That's a coward. No. The time will come when that sheet will be ripped off. If the federal government doesn't take it off, we'll take it off.